All right, we are going to get started. I'm so glad you're here. We have such an amazing hour ahead of us, and I'm really looking forward to what we have here with Kristin, who we'll share a little bit more about in just a few minutes. But per usual, you are in the absolutely right place, the best place to be at 12:30 on a Friday afternoon. So what we're really here for, which is we have an amazing guest today, Kristin Toth-Smith. She is an inspiring entrepreneur with an amazing career. And I'm so thrilled that she's here to share some of that with you. She was part of Amazon in some of the earlier stages of Amazon, has been a part of other very interesting companies like Zulily and Codefellows, and then currently is a part of a company called Dolly, which I'm sure she'll share a little bit more about with you. Kristin is also a graduate of the College of Engineering here at the University of Michigan and has gone on to do some tremendous things. She's also continued to be very active in outreach to all sorts of aspiring entrepreneurs. So she is a mentor at TechStars. She has helped tremendously with Empowered and is currently on the Center for Entrepreneurship board as well. So let's welcome Kristin Toth-Smith. Thank you.
I'm really excited to be back here because I was thinking about this as I was standing backstage, and about, maybe 2.5 years ago, I sat in the front row here and listened to an entrepreneur talk, and a lot of things has changed about the Center for Entrepreneurship in the last couple of years, but the thing that hasn't changed and has only sort of heightened is the enthusiasm and the excitement and the diversity of the students that we're seeing in this room. So really honored to be here today. Like Matt was saying, I graduated from here a few years ago. This building didn't exist, and other buildings were around but looked slightly different and were named different things, so I can't find my way around anymore. I got louder. Hopefully not that loud. All right, and what happened when I was here is I finally figured out that I should probably do something other than lifeguarding and playing violin for my jobs, and I should go get a proper engineering internship. So what does somebody from Metro Detroit do? I went to GM. And I did a great internship there. I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of really great, smart people, and I really liked the product. But there was just something that didn't fit for me. And I actually came back and did another internship during second grad school that just sort of reaffirmed this theme that started happening in my career. And that was that I didn't fit with a bigger, bureaucratic, more established company, because the things that I thought were really exciting and fun, and the places where I felt like I could add something special were smaller, earlier stage, more blank sheet of paper. But growing up here, that was weird. It was really weird 20 years ago to think about going into some really risky startup. I mean, I was here like through the dot-com boom and bust, and so I remember talking to my dad, who was like, why would you possibly go to a place that has .com at the end of the name of the company? Like, they're gonna just not be around for your whole career. And this was from my dad that worked at GM for most of his career. And who knew that I'd be working at Amazon, which had thrived and survived the .com bubble, and GM would go bankrupt. So there's no certainty in life, that's what I will tell you. And the things that you're continually taking risks, and what I think is really important to kind of come out of this is that every day you are taking risks, and so find the ones that are going to be the most exciting to you. So I'll tell you a little bit more about my career. So like I said, I was here during the time when e-commerce was really kind of accelerating, and I thought it was really interesting the way that you could use the internet technology to sort of connect people and companies and parts of business that had never been connected before. So when I did my last internship during my time here, I went to Lucent Technologies, and at the time you could buy an airline ticket online. There were some things like Dell computers online, so there were some consumer-facing products. Amazon was just kind of starting up, so you could buy some books on Amazon. That was all they had. And it looked really funny. I don't know if you go back and you look at Amazon's website from 1997. It's pretty awesome today. But I remember just thinking about what could you do if you had two companies or you were connected in a more scalable way with customers? And I started thinking, because I was in operations and manufacturing, what could happen all the way back up through a supply chain? So when I was doing this internship, we did a lot of study on Dell, and so when Dell came to campus, I was like, I've got to interview with them. And offline, I can tell you how weird that experience was, but somehow they ended up offering me a job, and I moved to Texas, which also was weird. But turns out Austin is really awesome, and now everybody knows that, but we didn't know that back then. And I worked at Dell, and I was put in charge of essentially all of the technology that needed to be created and installed and executed for a completely new manufacturing facility. And at the time, I could make PowerPoint, and you had to do some Excel stuff. And I talked about e-commerce a lot, but I didn't really know anything about hardware or software development other than what I had done in class. And so it was a really humbling experience, but I got this opportunity to just say, like, well, what if I took this? What if I could figure it out? Like, let's try it. Let's see what we can do. And so I talked a lot to a lot of different people. I listened, I asked questions. I kind of got to the point where I was like, all right, well, I'm a process person, so software's got to be a process, or at least what it's doing has to result in a good process. So let's go just map this out. I said, if we're doing this today and we start moving all these things around, we have to be able to move these things around. And why do we have all this paper on the floor? Why don't we have this information at this point where somebody might need it? And so we started thinking about other ways we could implement technology. I learned how you size a data center. I learned the difference between a router and a switch. I spent $40 million on a data center, and this was just coming out of school. And there were times where I sort of realized I didn't really have that authority. I was given this authority, but I didn't really have anything to back it up. I was just making really kind of big decisions off of listening and asking questions and taking risks and trying to minimize how much damage I could do. This became a theme. So Dell at the time, I had come from GM family, the biggest company in the world. They spun off the second biggest company in the world and still were the biggest company in the world. I went to Dell. It was only like 35,000 people across the world, and that seemed crazy tiny at the time. When everything started to slow down, I was working on a number of other technology projects, and a lot of the fun things I was doing were going away. And I had worked with these really great people who had done a really similar program to the Tauber program, which I did here, but through MIT. And they encouraged me to look into this grad school program. So I went back there, spent 2 years, again, just refreshing myself on the kind of best practices and thinking in operations, business, engineering, supply chain, and met just a lot of great people, including another alum who at the time was running worldwide operations at Amazon. And when he came in and he showed us all how the website was taking a lot of the things and the theories that we were learning in class and applying them in the background to optimize the fulfillment promises that they were making and the methods that they were creating and choosing for the customer to be able to create really high standard promises to customers and then actually fulfill those in a really reliable way, I got really excited about that. So I went to Amazon and moved across the country, one end of I-90 all the way to the other end of I-90, and started off in operations at Amazon. And I spent 8 years there, where about every 18 months there was something new and scary that they didn't know how they were going to build, and I was always like, I'll do it. I can do that. I have no idea how. But I started to realize that the culture there really embraced taking that risk, and that was where I just sort of like got this fire. And so I built out same-day delivery back in 2005, and then built out a bunch of make-on-demand stuff so that like we don't have to hold physical media in the warehouses. We could actually just manufacture it right on demand. I then went to digital music, where everything that I had ever learned didn't help me that much, and all of a sudden we had infinite inventory. You didn't have to move anything around other than files, and so we built out what we thought customers really wanted, which was cloud-based music that didn't have any restrictions, so MP3-based files and ubiquity across all of your devices for all of your music. And that was kind of the first time I actually did say hold the presses for the New York Times at midnight in Seattle one night because we found a little bug. And we had a lot of people who were in the press kind of at midnight, oddly enough, realizing that we had turned on this web lab where we were starting to do cloud-based consumer-facing music. And we beat Apple and we beat Google, and we were not in the news at the time as even working on it. So it was a really exciting time there. After 8 years, I was like, I feel like I have this really big tool set that's begging to go build something. And I had a connection on LinkedIn who reached out to me to tell me about this company called Zulily that I hadn't heard of before, that was sort of in our backyards. And they were developing an e-commerce platform that was flash sale based, so limited time, limited quantity products, but really aimed at moms, which I knew from Amazon was a really tough but really awesome group of customers to have loyalty from. And the numbers that they had already gotten at Zulily with those customers and their loyalty were sort of surpassing anything that we had seen even with Prime and some of the things we had done at Amazon. And so I was kind of intrigued. And the pitch from the CEO was, look, we don't even know where to start with our operations. We need somebody who can come in and actually tell us what we need to do and where we should spend the resources today and tomorrow. And so here it was, an earlier stage company. We had all hands every Tuesday in the hallway, and it was much, much smaller, much, much earlier stage, completely blank sheet of paper when we looked at what we needed to do. We quickly outgrew all of our outsourced operations. So we had a really exciting project where I can talk about this too later if you guys are interested, but I was sitting in the chairman and the CEO's office and we were talking about how we had kind of gotten into this partnership that was really kind of slowing us down. We had to turn off marketing, we had to limit how high we would price or how low we would price products because we were trying to slow down our growth, because our fulfillment partners couldn't keep up with it. And we talked about, what can we do? We can add more capacity by finding other partners. We could work with the current one, or we could do this ourselves. And it was August, and we knew that Christmas was coming. It's the e-commerce version of Game of Thrones, winter is coming. It's that sort of horrifying when you're in e-commerce, Christmas is coming. So, I was like, well, eventually we want to have this as our own capabilities, but we just don't have time. We've got to do something now. And so Daryl looked at me and he said, well, how long does this take? And I said, well, most companies take 18 months, maybe 24 months. Really good companies do it in 12 months. Amazon can do it in 8. They have all the software and all the infrastructure and people that know what they're doing. And so he looked at me and said, what can you do in 8 weeks? Well, I could probably spend 8 weeks telling you what I could do, or we could just start and see what happens in 8 weeks. And so actually 10 weeks later, because we bought ourselves 2 weeks, on November 1st, we opened our first fulfillment center. On January 16th of the next year, we opened our second fulfillment center, and we turned off all external fulfillment partners, which was really exciting and one of the coolest projects I've ever worked on. Really hard, really tough. We made a lot of just good, lucky decisions, and we also just kept thinking like, okay, what are the things that we need to do that will minimize the worst possible thing happening, like customers getting the wrong thing or not getting what they were supposed to get, or security breaches, and we're like, we just have to avoid that at all costs, and everything else might be messy, but we'll figure that out. And so we just kept like peeling back the layers of onion and saying, all right, this is our primary concern, what's our secondary concern, what's our tertiary concern, how do we actually go after doing those things. And we even had stretch goals for like the culture we wanted to build in our warehouses, and how we wanted that to be different, and we wanted everybody to feel valued and part of this startup team. And what was really great is at the end of all of this, we ended up having this great capacity and the sort of freedom to be able to build this out the way that we felt was most important. And we also had the opportunity to create this great culture. And so I worked there for about a 2.5-year stint, started building a new product, a new service, a new business for them. And that was really exciting, except that the core business was growing so quickly that every single software developer that we hired needed to go toward this core business. And so I did a lot of the business development work that needed to get done, a lot of the analysis work that needed to get done, and then decided that I needed to peel myself away from that because it just didn't make sense for Zulily to invest in that at the time. And so I went on this journey because I had been getting contacted, given what we had done with our fulfillment center and our operations backend. I'd been getting contacted by a lot of e-commerce companies saying, like, how do you even figure that stuff out? Like, this is my situation, this is what we really care about. How do we figure out where to start? And that kind of intellectual challenge was really interesting. So I started working with a bunch of e-commerce companies. I was on the board of advisors of a couple of them. I started consulting. And one of the ones that I was consulting with was a service-based business that was actually trying to create more software developers in short amount of time, kind of like a vocational school. These coding boot camps like Grand Circus in Detroit, whom Damien was supposed to be here with me. He had something else come up. Anyway, we were trying to make more software developers, which really spoke to me because that was the thing that was limiting me all the time. Like, we could do this cool thing, but we don't have enough software developer resources. And so thinking about being able to, from my manufacturing background, create more software developers, which were a really kind of core resource to everything that I thought was the coolest parts of optimization and opportunity, that just really spoke to me. And so I was consulting with Code Fellows, and they came to me and they said, look, we need somebody to run this. And so I took on my first CEO role, kind of just coming out of our proof of concept phase as we scaled and as we grew. And I went through what I would call the toughest job that I've ever had. I've had like a lot of big challenges, but being CEO is a challenge in a way that is really difficult to describe to somebody. And now that I'm COO and I have a CEO that I can look at every day, I tell him, like, I'm really glad that you're sitting in that seat, and I'm glad to be helping support you because it's a really crazy role in that you feel the weight of the company on your shoulders. You see so many different paths to get to where you want to go. There are landmines across every one of those paths, and you're sort of trying to make a decision, even with as much data as you can get, that sometimes is just like hoping for the best. And we grew that company. It was really great. And after a while, I realized that as passionate as I am about education and as I am about the need to build more software developers for the startups and the big companies that are doing great things out there, that my passion really did lie in more of a business that looked more like e-commerce. And I met the CEO of Dolly, Mike, on my very last day of Code Fellows, and I was determined to take time off. And I remember telling him, look, I'm not trying to meet you today, but really engaged well with what we were trying to do, or what Dolly was trying to do, and with the team that they had built to do it. So at the time, there were about 5 people working on the product and the service full time. They had launched in one market and sort of soft launched in another. And what we do is we're kind of an Uber-like app where we have a supply side of the marketplace, which is generally guys, but some girls too, with pickup trucks who want to help people lift, move, transport, deliver things locally that they would otherwise have to rent a U-Haul or hire a mover or borrow a friend's pickup truck. And so it's that sort of thing where it's like, I need a pickup truck to get this thing from here to here, usually hyper-local, and we have just created this app marketplace to be able to connect the people that need those services with people who can provide them. You book into 30-minute windows, you get a price quote up front so you know what you're gonna pay, no hidden anything after that. You have direct communication with the actual person who's getting your stuff or coming so that you can talk directly with them, which is another thing that is really difficult and inconvenient about the other options out there. And we've created a bunch of great retail partnerships and other business development partnerships to help us be at that point of pain for customers so that we can help create a better experience. And we have a lot of people who have said, you know, moving sucks, but not so much with Dolly. Or we actually had somebody that said, you know, if anything has made my divorce better, it's being able to use Dolly to move out of the house. and things like that. So when we get that kind of feedback, it's really exciting. And the way that we think about it is really about making that whole experience a lot less stressful and creating. So our mission actually is to create freedom of time, of money, and from stress. And so when we think about that, we're kind of doing this to be able to create options and time and remove worry from our customers' lives. And because the bar is kind of low these days with what you can use, we've actually been able to kind of delight customers in something that they were dreading. So with that, I think what we'll do is that's a little bit about how I've sort of journeyed through my career, and we're going to bring out a couple of folks to help facilitate some questions on that.
All right. Thank you, Kristin.
Yeah.
We'll just take a seat wherever. Right. Pick your favorite one.
All right, I'll pick this one next to the book. Y'all are reading Peter Thiel. What do you guys think?
I don't know if they want to admit whether or not they're reading Peter Thiel yet, but they're all supposed to be reading and will have read soon.
This is the most exciting thing to do, 0 to 1, but it's super scary. You can go iterate a lot, and there are a lot of times where that works because you find that thing that just ignites that delight for customers, but this is the scary, fun part.
Which points in your career have you felt like you've been doing the 0 to 1 vertical innovation as opposed to that horizontal innovation?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think in some sense, most of my career has been 0 to 1 in some sense, but not completely greenfield. So I think Dolly is one of the times where we actually are creating a new segment that doesn't exist today. The funny thing is like one of the co-founders was moving in Chicago, and he was like, I was looking for Dolly, basically thinking it has to already exist, right? And because he couldn't find it, he was really frustrated, and that's what kind of led to the conversation that led to the formation of the company.
That's fantastic. When your career, as you've shared here, has been marked by several significant changes that you've taken. When you make those changes, is there anything in particular that you've been looking for? Like what is the motivation behind making a change like that so significantly?
I don't think I realized it at first because like risk and fear, all of that was like sort of worked against where I grew up and how I was programmed to think. But I think now I recognize that as opportunity. If I'm scared to do it or I don't know how I'm going to get it done, then likely nobody else does either, and so that's where the big opportunity is. I did always look for the places where I could learn something new. That kind of comfort or turning the crank or incrementally just inching things along, that got really old to me really fast, and always my feedback from internships and things like that were like, you should have more patience. And so I really realized that I was always looking to learn, and whether it was, going to classes and reading books and that sort of thing, or just taking on opportunities in my job to do things that I had no business doing or didn't know how to get done, that were going to challenge me to build new skills. That's been the theme sort of through that. And a lot of times that really fits in the scariest situation in front of me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Lauren, do you have something you would like to ask?
Yeah, definitely. So you talked a lot about just the different jobs that you've had and things you've picked up and just how you'd like to take risks. So what would you say is your personal brand that you bring into all that you do?
Good question. I think a lot of it is, I think the thing that makes me unique and why I moved in Zulily from once we established all of our back-end software and the processes that were running our operations, from all the logistics and the interactions with the vendors all the way through to fulfillment to customers, then it was really a scale game. And I was like, I could do that, but where I think I'm really good is that I have time pressure, I have resource pressure, we don't know how we're gonna get there, it needs to be built, and we only have a few tools. I've become this, like, I could use a wrench to build a house if I needed to, right? Like, that's probably not the easiest way to do it, but if you only have a wrench, like, I'll figure out how to do that. Or I might figure out how to use, like, a chainsaw and a hammer in ways that have never been used before, but you can sort of figure out that like this is all I have, so how do I use these tools in a new way together to create something that hasn't existed before? And that sort of building and looking at like what resources do I have and how do I bring them together to accomplish this goal for something that hasn't existed before, that's where I think I have different skills than some other people.
Thank you for coming out today.
Yeah.
I have a question about the gender disparity within high-tech roles.
Yeah.
So you've been very outspoken and speaking out against this gender disparity. You've written a few articles, and you also have a chapter in a book coming out,
Yep.
which I'm excited to read. So in one of your articles, which is called Why the Coding Culture Needs a Makeover, you talk about how companies and organizations can work together in order to promote a culture that embraces more women in these high-tech roles and also stops women from self-selecting out of these high-tech roles.
Yeah.
So could you talk about the initiatives within that article and what you've been doing personally to help stop this culture that is not as embracive as women as it should be?
Yeah, I think the fact that we don't see women in leadership in general in the same proportions as we might think that we should, or we see people self-selecting out of STEM roles or other roles where we see a lack of diversity across a number of different levels. That has been sort of an undercurrent that, like when I was here, I remember Society of Women Engineers and a lot of the like women groups, I was like, nah, I'll just go and do the best I can and people will just notice that. And then in grad school, I actually took a class with the former Prime Minister of Canada about gender, and it was called Gender and Power. And I basically learned that we all have these innate biases that we're all sort of working with. And I have them for other women, I have them for men, I have them for different cultural things. And so those are things that you probably won't get rid of, but you will, if you understand that they're there, you can recognize them and work against them for your own decision making. And I think that's the toughest part, is that every individual has a different set of those biases, and that it takes a lot of work to recognize those and act differently. And because of that, I think it's an individual thing, an awareness thing. It's also a cultural thing. So I was on an interview loop with 2 MBAs, both interviewing for the same role, and the woman was very team-oriented. She talked about, well, my team did this, and we did this, and we at the end did this, and she was pretty soft-spoken. And I asked her, what was your role on the team? And it turned out that really she did a lot of it, right? But she talked about the team because that's where she was most comfortable. The guy was incredibly effervescent and outgoing, and he talked about, I did this, I did this, I did this. And when I started digging in, because again, like I was like, okay, what did you do exactly? How did you make that decision? What were the things around that decision that you considered? It turned out he was working with a lot of other people, but that's not how he talked about it. So when we were deciding who was going to get that role, I asked the other interviewers, well, did you dig in and find out what they specifically did individually? Because I know that this guy sounded like he did everything, and she sounded like she was part of a team that did it. But actually, if you dug down deeper, you could get the real information about what was going on. So just small things like that where you can see like, okay, these are the assumptions that I have in my head and the things I'm filling in. And you can bring that up and just sort of ask like, well, how do you know? How do you know? These are assumptions that you're making. How do you know? Did you check? Did you get the data? I think that can be really powerful, and that there are a lot of companies that are looking not only at their process for evaluating candidates and for evaluating performance after you're at a company for those kind of baked in biases, but they're also looking at how are they writing job descriptions? Are they turning people off? Are the things that are making your culture really cool and unique actually turning off a lot of people who would be great hires for you, but because it sounds super aggressive or it's not it really does sort of offend other people. Not trying to do that, but just sort of as an accident. So I'm kind of rambling here, but there are so many things that need to happen to actually result in what we actually want, which is the best people in the jobs, and that those people are, having successful careers. It's actually a tough problem because every step along the way, you can make a small mistake that you didn't even know that you made, and kind of jettison somebody from the process. And I've seen that happen so many different times.
Yeah, like you said, there's no silver bullet to solving this problem. There's a lot of different initiatives that you talked about that can be done to help mitigate it.
Yeah.
From the different initiatives that you just talked about, do you think there's one that's really important, maybe not a silver bullet, but one that's important that can really help mitigate the gender disparity?
I think the biggest thing that people could do is individually study the innate bias that they have and learn how to recognize it and sort of overcome it. And that's what's really exciting about that is it's not putting the blame on somebody else, like saying this company needs to change or this policy needs to change, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that needs to happen. But it's something that you can do, and if each individual person can sort of make a difference, just even like in that interview loop where I was like, well, how do you know? What did you ask? Did you dig deeper in there? And I find myself, catching myself all the time, like, oh my gosh, why did I get that sort of like underlying gut impression? And I was like, oh, it's because she has that sort of female thing where when she ends a sentence, it almost sounds like she's asking a question. And so she doesn't seem like she's really confident. So I can sort of do that, but it takes continual work, and the thing I like about that is that every single person can do that and make a difference and positively bring that to the teams they work with.
So do you think, given that Dolly in some ways, it seems kind of, when you think of it, you think of two guys or a couple guys, right, in a truck. Interestingly enough, Dolly, which seems like this play on a Dolly and also kind of the female name Dolly.
Yeah.
Are there things that you're able or that you are doing with Dolly to make sure that you bridge some of those gaps?
So it's really interesting. I have this current conflict in that we do have women who are in our helper fleet. So those are the people that have pickup trucks and help lift things. And certainly there are women who can lift 75 pounds and are very effective at doing the job, but we've heard a lot of times from customers that they feel badly when a woman comes into their house, like they need to actually help, and that weird chivalry or like mistrust or women are not as strong or something kicks in, and it actually results in something that makes them unhappy. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, and how do we change that? I don't have the answer yet. And it might be about how we pair people up. It might be about how we talk about different helpers. The cool thing that I can say about Dolly as a culture is we have the best 15 people I have ever worked with in my life in terms of how respectful they are and how thoughtful they are and the way that they work together and the way that we want to win. And we actually have one of our company values that I don't know if I should say this in this big of a forum, but it's called no divas, no dicks. And
worse has been said on this stage.
I'm sure. I have to actually really filter because I've been in operations for a long time. So with that, one of the things that we talk about is like we work hard and we're also really respectful, and that those two things are not mutually exclusive. And that's the thing where you kind of find in the world sometimes that you'll find people who work really hard, but they completely forget the personal side of things and the human side of things, or companies that are really focused on the human side of things, but forget to try to win in their business. And we're really trying to build a company that does both. And the team embodies this today, and I love that we've solidified that in our culture to the extent that we're gonna keep pushing that out as we go in the future. We're gonna hold each other accountable to that. We're gonna hire people that embody those things, and we'll build something sustainable off of that.
That's great. What we'd like to do is also open up to some questions from you, from the audience. We have a couple program assistants who have mics for you. So is there anyone who would like to ask Kristin a question?
Yes, I'm Wayne. Through your career, were there any books that you read that majorly influenced the way you make decisions or think about your business?
I will admittedly say that I started this book and I get halfway through any nonfiction business book and I'm like, this is all just the stuff the publisher made you do, which is why I wrote one chapter in a book. So I will say I'm somewhat cynical on reading entire books in that I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of repetition of what could be common sense. That said, there are tons of really great books out there that get you thinking, and especially after you leave this environment of being, educating yourself every single day, you got to look for those things that like shake your brain free of like the muck that's right in front of you. So, like any of the Clayton Christensen books, I love reading. I love Peter Thiel. When I was doing the CEO thing, I read The Hard Thing About Hard Things because it really is your like book support group. There's so many that are out there. I would say the thing that probably had the biggest impact is that when I was at MIT, I took a class that was called System Dynamics, which anybody in EECS would actually feel like, oh, duh. But it was a business class that talked about feedback loops and delays and the way that systems work together in the sort of real world. And that has been probably the single biggest influence in how I make decisions and how I think about big systems of things. So usually when you're focused on a point in front of you, you can optimize that point, but if you don't think about like what chain reactions is that going to set into motion, and what are the feedback loops, and what do I not see today because there's a delay in the system, that's the sort of stuff, it sort of ruins you. You walk through the world sort of like you're in the Matrix and you can see it, but it really does help, I think, make better decisions, and to think about the fact that like I'm making this one small thing, this one small decision in this one particular piece of the system, and I'm gonna have all kinds of opportunities down the road to tweak and adjust. I just have to be really aware of the things that are happening around that.
So if not books, are there other things that you use to, as you said, engage your brain and continue learning?
A lot of it is actually, when I think about mentoring or networking or coming back to campus, that's a huge thing that really does just take me out of the environment that I'm in and expose me to new things. And so this is really as helpful for me, not this exact thing, but like when I get to interact with students or professors or hear about research or cool projects that are going on that I'm not involved with, that does sort of give me new lenses and new perspectives to consider, which is huge. And I listen to TED Talks. I do like read at least half of the book often. And then I work with really curious people who also like to read, and right now Chad, one of the co-founders at Dolly, just read Crossing the Chasm, and so we are having a lot of debates about, are we in the chasm, are we about to hit it, like what do we do to, like in Dolly's particular situation, to go through, and like being able to have academic conversations with smart people every single day is really motivating, and I think keeps us from getting too stuck in what we're doing.
Just real quick, you mentioned the word mentor, and I know you're a mentor for TechStars, so one, like what's kind of a thing that you see as a common, I guess, flaw or like problem that a lot of people that you mentor face, and then also what type of role does having mentors play in your life, or even how you pick your own mentors?
Yeah. So the first question about the common things that entrepreneurs will do that will get in their way, I think the first one really is, and this is why there's so much emphasis on customer development. The first one is that you come up with a great idea, but you don't get it out in front of customers to be able to get the real feedback from them. You're making a lot of assumptions. So customer development is something that especially engineers and people with really great ideas, they're so in love with the idea, they just feel like it's going to resonate with people. But when you actually start putting those things in front of potential customers, you get so much like micro and macro feedback, and you want to do that early before you invest a lot of time. As far as mentors in my own career, I think mentorship doesn't look any particular way, and I think that that's one thing that if I were to, I've been working on an online class about mentorship, both how to be an effective mentee and how to create an effective mentorship from a company perspective and from a mentor perspective. That doesn't have to look any certain way. And I feel like I have a lot of people who are great advisors in my life, whom I have a ton of respect for, whom I could go to and sort of talk through different decisions or challenges that I'm facing, and I know I'm gonna get really good advice and perspective. But I think mentorship is a slightly evolved evolved sense of that, where you're actually like, I'm trying to work on something and I need somebody outside of my everyday to work on that with me, and you decide like, I'm I'm entering into this relationship, we're working on this thing, and when we feel like we've gotten to where we're going to get to, we're going to actually evolve our relationship again. And I don't have anybody like that right now, actually, but I have a ton of really great advisors and people that throughout my career I've met, or even just met online, or I've run into in different places, and they've become friends and they've become advisors, and I am super grateful for all those people, and a lot of the opportunities that I've had, that I've taken, have come through those relationships. So,
Going off of that question, how would you describe your leadership style today as the COO of Dolly, and also while you're mentoring other teams as a mentor at TechStars?
yeah, mentoring I think is really about more coaching and asking questions and teaching people to fish, and sometimes just saying like, all right, here's how I would think about it, but really trying to coach people through the process so that they're not just making decisions today, but they're learning how to make those decisions down the road. And there's the Socratic process of just asking the questions. Because a lot of times when you're an outsider, you don't actually know the answers. I can give perspective, or this is what I did, but in your particular situation, you want to ask this question, you want to think about this. So that's how I think about the mentoring relationship. Sorry, remind me the other part of your question.
Also, as your leadership style today.
Oh, my
as the
leadership
COO
style
of
today.
Dolly.
Why did I jettison that from my brain? No, I think the thing that I've learned over the course of my career is that although I really feel a lot of responsibility and want to take on that responsibility and therefore a lot of the work in a lot of situations, that the best thing that I can do for the teams long term that I'm managing is to help them understand what is the context, what are the things that are really important, what are the priorities, and then help them do a lot of the work to help get there. So that delegation is one of the hardest things, not even just emotionally, but when you're in the thick of it and you're processing all these different things, and I have inputs and information that my team doesn't have because of conversations I'm having outside of the company or within the company. I have to be sharp enough to be able to say, how do I communicate that efficiently to my team and effectively to my team so that they have the same context? Then how do I create the right strategy and priority set and communicate that to the team, and then empower them to go deliver the pieces that get there? And that can be really hard because you have to have mental clarity. You have to know what you're actually trying to accomplish and be able to communicate that to somebody or a team that doesn't have the same context you do. And a lot of times I think leaders don't make the time, don't make the priority, and it's really hard for them to explain what they want or what they need or where the company's going, and so they just jettison that and they don't empower their teams.
Alrighty, we got one final question up here in the audience.
So it seems like in your career you've had to take a lot of risks, and one topic about this class is failure. So I guess I wanted to just get your take on how you've dealt with any sort of failure.
Yeah, so I was an engineer, and I did a lot of classes where you get a lot of data and you'd apply equations, and at the end of the paper you could draw a box around the answer, and it was either right or wrong. And sometimes you got partial credit for the things, but we were focused on the box. Was that right or wrong answer? And I think what I found a lot in business, and I've been sort of continually coaching myself out of, is there's not right or wrong. There's a lot of things that you can do that work out better and things that work out a little bit worse, but it's not a failure until you stop trying. And so I think that every time that you make maybe a suboptimal decision or you make a decision without all of the information, you have an opportunity to learn. And that's where I think it's really exciting to take that risk and not be afraid to be wrong, right? I have still sometimes where I don't like losing arguments because I don't like to be wrong. I want to be right all the time, but that's just not realistic. And if you want to be right all the time, you're going to probably self-select into things that are not risky, are not big, are not going to change anything, and you'll just keep it really small and really safe for yourself. So you have to be okay sometimes being wrong. And sort of just get over that. And then you have to look at every time that you things don't work out the way that you thought they were going to as a learning opportunity.
Well, if you have more questions, you're welcome to come up for a few minutes afterwards. Kristin will have a few minutes to field a few more questions from the stage. For those of you after that, if you want to stay and talk entrepreneurship shop a little bit or learn about some of the other programs like the Singapore program, you're welcome to stay after that as well. Let's give Kristin our gratitude.
It's good to be back. The king is back. So Adrian Fortino, he's gotten super complacent. I mean, I don't want to say lazy, but I mean lazy. My winning strategy this year is the same as last year. That's just to be me.